So today I want to show you something really cool. Now we're going to make an update to a real Figma plugin using Claude Code. And I've actually gone through the experience, so I have a better understanding of what's going on and how to make updates. I'm using this without cursor. Usually I would use cursor, and this is the result. This is a real Figma plugin that I'm building solo, and essentially it allows you to turn any Figma component into code. So what is really interesting here is that we're going to be able to compare between different models of AI. So for example, I'm going to go to the history, and I'm going to be able to see, let's say, this component right here. Let me zoom in. It looks a little bit like this, and you know, I want to turn this into code, and I have different languages that I want to turn into. So for example, HTML and Tailwind, or you can have React, Vue, Svelte, all of these different frameworks. Now, the only one that's going to work with preview, which is what we are interested in, you know, we have the code and then we also have the preview, and we're going to be able to compare between the different models. So this one is generated using Claude 3.7, which is really cool. So you can see it's all adaptive. It's almost perfect. Actually, I would say it's pretty much perfect. Why? Because the only problem is the image, and obviously the image is not going to be able to be turned into code. That is just a normal issue. But let's compare it to different models. So for example, I have the detail here, and I have 3.5, and yes, notice the difference, right? Like this is 3.5, and it's gonna get worse. You know, I'm gonna show you 4.0, and this is 4.0, right? Like even the coloring is not correct. There's no outline, and you know, like the centering of the image is completely wrong. So you can see the difference. And let's try another one. We have, I believe, we have this one. And we are going to show you, let's start with, again, GPT 4.0, and then we have this. You can see, again, we have the image, the size and the outline is not showing. And let's see for 3.5. So here it's a little bit better. It's using icons. It does show the 80% in blue, and the shape is better. So, but the outline is not perfect, although there is an outline. You know, in 4.0 is just no outline. Now let's take a look at 3.7, and yeah, this is basically near perfect. The 19 is not correct, but you know, as you can see, it's definitely better than before, and that is what is interesting. Now, what we're gonna be building today is exactly these features. So a lot of people ask me, okay, how, you know, I want to use 3.7 now, Claude 3.7, and you know, because I haven't updated the plugin yet, so I just, you know, this morning I just popped it up and I tried to update it, and I thought, well, why not do it in Claude Code, right? So instead of using cursor, usually this is what I would use, and you know, I did two features. The one is, you know, the easiest one, which is to be able to just add new models. This is super easy. It's just a few lines of code. And the hard one, which took a few prompts, but I managed to do it, and I was really impressed because I, you know, technically speaking, I don't know how to do it. I do know sort of the logic. So for example, I want a history. You know, this feature here is not live, it's not updated. This is a new feature that I just did using Claude Code. Now, why is this complicated? Well, it needs to have some form of a storage, right? Like it needs to know to save the history of the code that are being generated. So that's not easy. You know, it needs, when I click on it, it needs to reenact all of the code that was generated before and the preview, right? And also, you know, there's a few functionalities such as being able to delete and to be able to clear the whole history and to scroll and all that stuff. The UI, you know, usually is fairly easy if you have an existing UI. So for example, I was just able to say, all right, so I have this UI about settings. I want to have the same for the history. Obviously I could have said I want the same UI as this one or the prompt one. So when you have a context, then the UI is fairly easy. But the functionality itself, you're gonna need to be specific. You're gonna need what you need to build and give some sort of context and comparison in the past. So let's give it a try. Usually what I would do is to open Cursor and open the project. These are the changes that I have done so far, but we're gonna do it from scratch. Don't worry, I save it somewhere so I can come back to it. But I'm gonna go back to before the changes, right? And the reason why I'm doing it in Cursor, obviously if you do it in Cursor, you have far more functionalities, right? Like if you do it in a terminal using Claude Code, yes, it does a lot of the, agentic coding, and it's also able to change the code. But the problem is you're missing a lot of the functionality, such as, history, commits, and all that stuff. Undoing, reviewing the changes, all of these small little things that really makes life so much easier. But we're gonna be missing a lot of that. So that's why I'm doing a lot of the the undo part here. And now we're basically from scratch before the changes. And let's take a look. Yes, we don't have Claude 3.7 and we don't have the history feature. So this is before I did all of these changes. So now we're gonna start a new terminal and we're gonna get started. So a little bit of context here. We are using Cursor, which is the code editor. This is what I've been showing you. Normally this is how I edit code and create projects. But also we're using Claude, and Claude is an AI model, is the best one at coding by far in my experience. And specifically, we're using the new Claude Code. Now, if you're new to any of this stuff, I would highly, highly suggest that you go to claude.ai and that you start just creating something from here. So this allows you to create any project by just using prompt. You don't need to install anything so far. For example, I was able to create this one here. I'm not sure why the preview is not working, but yes, it's right here. So, with just a few prompts, I was able to, be able to upload a screenshot and do a little bit of animations. It's kind of cool. And yeah, so that is what is possible. That is what is exciting today. And you can create any of this stuff, whether you're a beginner or an expert, whether you know how to use these tools or not. Anyone can just reach a website and create any of these projects. So for example, I want to create like a UI to post directly to X. That would be cool, but just for experimentation. Now, what we're doing today is a real project, and we're going to be using Claude Code, as I mentioned before. But first of all, let's talk about pricing. Some people are complaining about Claude 3.7 being a little bit expensive. From my experience, first of all, it's the same pricing as before. And if you go to the pricing, you can see here we have pretty much the same pricing as before. So 3.7 is the same pricing as 3.5, which is what I used before. Now, the second thing is, if you use Cursor, the pricing doesn't really matter because you have Cursor, which is one subscription, $20 a month, depending on your usage, but you have a maximum of 500 fast premium and unlimited slow. So it doesn't matter as long as you're not using O1 mini or O1, I believe, right? But for Claude, it doesn't matter. So if you're worried about pricing, you're just using using Cursor. You have one price, and that's it. It includes everything, and you have unlimited usage. Obviously, I'm talking about the slow ones, but for the fast one, 500 is enough for most people. So that's about pricing. Now, the next thing is we need to install Claude Code, and if you want to know how to do that, then you need to go through the the documentation, and here's telling you what to do. And you need to know a little bit about sort of Node. So you need to install Node first. You're gonna go to node.js, and you're gonna download this for your platform. And you need to know what is a terminal. And yes, so once you have all of that, you open the terminal, which looks a little bit like this, and you're gonna copy and paste this code right here. You're gonna put into the terminal, and then you're gonna run it, and it's gonna go through a bunch of process. And once that is done, then you should have the command call Claude, right? You should be able to run this, and you're gonna go to your project. In my case, funnily, I call my project the Figma plugin Dream Code. But yes, I'm in my project directory. If you need to know a little bit about, go into a directory like CD and then the name of the directory. In my case, I put it in projects, and it's going to be Dream Code. You can also press tab to autocomplete if it knows sort of like it's going to filter basically what start with Dream, for example. So anyways, if you type everything right, you enter into the directory. Now you're going to type Claude, and this is where you're going to be able to start your experience. And you can just say manual and stuff and enter. And yeah, at this point, you can say, if your project needs running, you can say run. And it's going to sort of like look through the code and see if you need to start a server, start a local environment, etc. And so it's going to examine your package.json. If you haven't done coding before, this is where sort of all the configuration for your website is going, the libraries that needs to be installed, and all of that stuff. So this is what I'm doing right now. Yes, it is a little bit slow. I think Cursor definitely, from my experience, seems to be faster. So you can see like 39 seconds. Yes, I'm gonna try to speak through that experience. But yeah, so far this is reading the code base, npm install, run build, etc. So the first thing that we are going to do, which is very easy, is we have our Figma plugin here. And let me walk you through the experience of having a Figma plugin. Typically, you want to go to the Figma logo in Figma, and then you want to go to plugins, and you're going to go to development, and you're going to do manage. Well, if you don't have a plugin, you're going to do new plugin, and then, and if you already have a plugin, you're going to do import plugin from manifest, and it's going to select the manifest file. If not, you're going to create a new plugin. It's going to create like a template for a new plugin. But so far, this is what I have. And then if you have a plugin and you added the manifest, it's going to look a little bit like this. And then you're going to reveal in Finder to make sure that you have the correct plugin. So yeah, it's called Dream Code, and then you run it. Yeah. So once you run it, this is the current version, and it's simply the code from that directory. So this is where we are, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna say add support for Claude Sonnet 3.7. Now, it is helpful to know what is the name of the API. So here I'm gonna go to the API documentation, and I'm gonna go here, and I'm gonna go to the model, and this is the name of the model. So I'm gonna copy this. I'm sure they have a shorter version, but just for not wasting your time, I'm just gonna copy this one. This one is what's working, and so Claude model, and I'm going to paste this, and I'm going to press enter. So this is the same experience as in Cursor for Composer and Agent. So it's going to read the code base. Now it knows that it needs to go to the UI.html. So what is really cool about this is that imagine if you're dropping in on a new project or something that you've worked on 6 months ago or 1 year ago. You don't remember how things work or where the files are. This is why UI is so useful. So now it's just saying, okay, well, we do have this, and do you want to make the change? So this is basically what it's kind of like the review in Claude. So now I'm going to say yes. And yeah, you know, it's making the change. And I think the speed is pretty comparable. What is interesting is that this is definitely more like an agent, because if it was an agent, it would just make one change, wait for another prompt, makes another change, wait for another prompt. In this case, it's able to sort of like read your code base and tell you, okay, well, maybe you need to also change the text that says 3.5 is recommended. Now it's updated to 3.7, and it's, you know, it's kind of like doing what a normal human being would do if it was a developer, not just stop at one prompt, but also look for kind of breadcrumbs of what's in the future. And yes, you know, like, let's also change this text, and it looks good. It's making the changes, and it's also recommending that we're doing a run build. I believe this is necessary if you want to create like a build so that you can publish the plugin, but I know that it's not necessary for showing the changes on the Figma plugin. So I'm just going to say no, and if everything is good, then I should be able to see 3.7 right here. Boom, it works. That's simple, right? And once I have that, I'm going to be able to, you know, select an element, generate the code, and this is how the plugin works, and then it's going to generate the code. I do not have a history yet, so we're going to see how that goes. But right now, I'm generating the code. It's taking a little bit of time. It seems to not work. So let me just try 3.5 to make sure. So let me review the code. I think the name might be wrong. I'm not sure. Let me see. So let me see. All right, so okay, so 3.5 works. Let me just go to the code. So this is where, you know, it gets a little bit dicey if you're not using cursor, because then I can't just go back to the code and kind of read the code. So I'm going to go to cursor, and obviously in cursor, it's making the changes, and now I'm going to be able to compare it. So 3.7, I don't know why it's not working, but it should be working. So the name is correct and all that stuff. And but yeah, you know, like, you can switch back and forth. But here I'm able to see the code base, the code file right here, and I'm able to compare and to see what has changed. I can see where the modifications are and all that stuff. So all right, let me try again. Maybe it was just something, you know, something wrong with it. But you know, it should be working. And if it wasn't working, it should be waiting so long. So I don't know why it did that. But anyways, the other thing that you can do is in Figma plugin, you can go to plugins, and you can go to development, and you can also go to show and hide console. So this, if something goes wrong, you're going to be able to see, you know, the error messages and stuff like that. In this case, I don't know why, but it's not working. And maybe it has to do with the billing. I'm not sure. But it was working before. So I'm just going to move on. And all right, so I managed to make it work. I actually don't know why. But one thing that could really help is to go to the billing, and you know, you're gonna need to add credit. And you know, if you're using the API from Claude, especially for an app that you're making, then you're gonna need to add credits when you're using that API. So in this case, this should solve the problem. And sometimes it gets a little bit iffy, but in this case, I was able to compare the code from before. You know, in this case, it's the previous code, and I see that it's exactly the same code. So yeah, it just solved itself. Happens sometimes in coding. I mean, that's just the nature of programming. Nothing is perfect. But we managed to make it work. Now let's get into the more complicated task. So in this case, I'm gonna go to the terminal again, and here again I don't need to run the build, and I'm going to say something like, okay, no, this is the other one, the new one, right? I'm gonna say, can you add a history of code sessions for the code session generated? So we're gonna do this, and this is definitely more complicated because it needs to know a lot of context, such as what are you talking about, like what code sessions, what history, what kind of UI you want, all of this stuff. So if you say this to a human, they're gonna be like, what are you talking about? And like there's so much context that needs to happen. But the magic of AI is that it has the code base, right? It reads the code base. It has knowledge of that. It can scan through that. It's really, really fast. And so it's definitely superhuman in that sense. Yes, it does take, 40 seconds. Yes, humans would take much longer than this. So that's, comforting to know that some things humans do better and some things AI do better. So, while we're waiting, let's take a look, and the UI that we want is this one. The reason why is because if we use this UI, it's going to push down the preview all the time, right? And then you have to scroll back and forth. So it's definitely going to show, from my experience, it's going to have this UI first. Okay, this is really, really quite long. So, okay, finally, we're getting somewhere, I think. And we want to tell that this is the kind of UI that we want afterwards. So, first of all, is generating the TypeScript. If you know coding, right? As you get better with coding, you're gonna get into sort of like, what is this piece of code, right? Like you're gonna be able to tell quickly, what is this piece of code? Okay, so this is the TypeScript stuff to make sure that it's type safe. For creating the history, we're gonna need an ID, a timestamp, what kind of code, what is the models that's being used, and all that stuff. And then it seems to be consistent, to be honest. Like from my past session, seems to be using the client storage. So I'm gonna say yes, and all that stuff. And it's gonna keep going and going because it needs to make multiple changes. What I find interesting is that it's not like Cursor, where it's just doing all of that stuff in one go, right? Here I have to go one by one. Okay, do you want to make it a change to this one? Do you want to make change to this one? So in that sense, I think Cursor has definitely the upper hand. But yeah, terminal is cool. It's very flexible, right? It's any platform can use it. It's been there for decades, way longer than Cursor. So Cursor has been around for like a year or something, or 2 years maybe. So in the end, I made all the changes, but I have to admit, it did not exactly go as planned, and it was making a little bit of a changes. It went through some errors. So instead of like retracing back and trying to to do things, and then at the cost of like making this video too long, I would just go back to the session that I had before. So we're gonna look through my experience with it, and I'm gonna explain how it went, because the way that it generated the history, it did it differently, and it also had a little bit of an error that was hard for me to kind of like explain, which is why we're gonna go back to the final result, and then we're gonna just walk you through exactly what happened. So obviously we do have the history, the same prompt that I did. So here we have, can you add history of code sessions generated? It did all of this stuff. It did it really well. In my experience, though, it used something called, storage and it didn't work for me at that time, which is why at some point I believe that I said, yeah, this is, I think the console is much harder to scan for me. So looking at what prompt that I ask. Okay, so all right, this is where I'm going to the next prompt, because at the end of the change that is doing, which is the change, imagine this is where this is the session that should have been like, because it did work really well last time. But yeah, as with AI code, it's not always going to show you exactly the same thing every time, which is why it's hard to have these sessions where everything goes right. And if I have to kind of like go through all of that stuff, it might take an hour sometimes, and it would be a little bit boring. But in this case, let's go to the next step. It did work in the last session. So, but in that session, it had this UI here that says history, and then it shows something like these cards, but it was also empty from my experience. And maybe I also realized that it did not update every time that I converted code. So that could be why. But anyways, I asked it, the history seems to be empty, right? And, and eventually I simply went to the console. Like I mentioned before, the console is really useful when you're developing, and to give context to AI, you're going to go to the console, and when you tap on something or when you click on something, you generate the code, and maybe in the console you're going to find something that relates to the history. And if you find something like that, so in this case, I was able to find something that has the history keyword, and when I tap on convert to code, and then I copy and paste all of this error into Claude Code, and it was able to fix it. So you can see here, I see the issue. The console errors show two main problems with local storage and update preview, which, by the way, this one was wrong, but I fixed it later. So it removed the update preview, which is useful when it updates every time you generate the code, and it shows the preview. And but it was able to solve the empty preview thing. And so I was able to solve that here. And let's see, it goes file by file. Obviously, yes, it also takes a little bit of time, which is why it's hard to do these sessions as well. But yes, so let's go to the next one. It seems that when I need to refresh the history to get it updated. Can you make it when we generate a new code, it's going to refresh the history, right? So this is what I wanted, and eventually I managed to get it, and that's it. That was like, what, 4 prompts so far, or 5 prompts? But yeah, this gives you a glimpse of how to use Claude Code and how does it differ with Cursor. And what are the advantages? I would say not many, to be honest. I would definitely use Cursor more. But yes, with Cursor, you do need to learn the UI. You do need to learn, all of these things, like how to manage the code and all that stuff. Where this is kind of like more straightforward. You go to the terminal and you have a chat session right away. You go to the directory and that's it. But it's just 2 different things. And I always say this. Usually the hardest part of learning code is just knowing how to get started, what software to install, what code editor to use, where the UI is, which is why I do have a course around Cursor for both Xcode and for React. So, if you want to learn sort of like how to start from scratch, you make sure to check my courses. But otherwise, this is Claude Code. I think it's really, really interesting that you're able to do this. And hopefully you're going to take, you're going to find this beneficial to you, at least to know what is the difference between Cursor and Claude Code. And, build your own project. And if you're a complete beginner, as I mentioned before, go to Claude.ai, just build something out of nothing. And this is the simplest way to get started. This is how I started, to be honest, and this is how I build my SVG dot, like the pattern generator. A lot of people seem to really like it. Someone like a lot of people tweeted about it and they really enjoyed it. We actually had quite a few payments. It made some money. I think it made like $2,000, which, you know, it's not nothing for a simple project made using AI. So definitely recommend that you give it a try and, you know, build products that you want to use and solve your own problems. And yeah, thanks for listening. I hope, again, you enjoy this format. Leave comments if you have any questions or if you have feedback, and I'll see you in the next video.